事件，中方注意到有关消息，并正在密切关注事态发展。我想重申，中国一贯主张国际刑事法院应严格遵循补充性管辖原则，依法审慎行使职权，避免政治化和双重标准。这是一个重要的突发事件，中方注意到有关消息，并正在密切关注事态发展。我想重申，中国一贯主张国际刑事法院应严格遵循补充性管辖原则，依法审慎行使职权，避免政治化和双重标准。这是一个重要的突发。
Judiciary and international mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of the International Career Support Association.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand here to denounce a grave injustice. Rodrigo Duterte, 80 years old, former president of the Philippines, who bravely fought illegal drugs to protect millions, has been unlawfully removed from the homeland and held in the prolonged pretrial detention by the ICC in The Hague. This is a political persecution and not justice. The current administration extradited him without due process, bypassing Philippine courts and violating national sovereignty. He was extradited without any due process and no local court. Incidentally, since March 11, 2025, exactly 1 year ago today, this elderly leader has endured detention, separated from family and serious health issues. Global rallies and protests in The Hague and throughout the world demands the interim release, which has been unlawfully denied by the ICC 3 times. This over 1 year pretrial detention raises profound question about compliance with the Rome Statute's guarantees of human treatment and speedy trial. It is an affront to human dignity and the abuse of international justice for political ends. We urge this Council to demand humanitarian review and interim release of President Duterte. Justice must be fair, not a weapon against the people. The majority of the Filipino voice will not be silenced and depressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of...
This is a court of law which decides matters on the basis of evidence, not on the basis of political demagoguery, and not on the basis of a desire to effect regime change despite the democratic will. And certainly not on the basis of statements made by Ombudsman Jesus Crispin Remulla, who professed that domestic justice will be denied, according to Mr. Butuyan, because of the lack of forensic reports and police reports. Now, I don't know which case Mr. Butuyan's metaphorical ship sailed into, but he clearly hasn't read the evidence. Whilst he was speaking, we examined the evidence, and out of that evidence we found at least 35 reports substantiating 49 of the incidents which are mentioned in the document containing the charges. Your Honours, Rodrigo Duterte was and will always remain a unique phenomenon. His style of statesmanship was novel and unpalatable to many. His expletives and hyperbole grated, while his honesty and wild popularity irritated. He spoke openly, from the heart, sincerely and truthfully. And what a contrast between him and his successor in the Malacanang. For President Rudy, his word was his word, and the people knew it. For President Bong Bong, his word is for the wind, and the people will not forget it. Let me remind everyone of the letter which President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. signed, it's on the screen, and in which he gave a cast-iron undertaking that his government, and I quote, will not assist the ICC in any way, shape or form. Well, as we know, he failed to keep that promise. Rodrigo Duterte was unconstitutional and unceremoniously hauled off to The Hague. And when called upon to defend his master's actions and the said letter at a Senate committee hearing, the then Secretary for Justice, once again Mr. Jesus Crispin Remulla, persisted with the same dishonest theme. And I quote his words, "We did not assist the ICC. We continue with the very tenor of the letter that we did not assist the ICC and we did not have any contact with them. So he said, but with a document emanating from the prosecution team opposite and disclosed to us a mere week ago, not as information material to the preparation of our defence, but as exonerating evidence, we can now substantiate what we have suspected for a long time. The document comprises a transcript of a telephone call covertly recorded between 4 parties who cannot be mentioned in public, and one of these parties was boasting about how he was acting as the silent partner of President BBM, managing a scheme to funnel witnesses to this court while all the time ensuring that he could guarantee President BBM's plausible deniability. So it is indeed the defence case that President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. set out to neutralise Rodrigo Duterte and his legacy. Yes, Mr. Deputy Prosecutor, I used that legendary word, neutralise, so central and so essential to your case theory, because you know just as well as me that I'm using the term metaphorically. And now I turn to the substance of the charges, but before I do, a word or two about the geopolitical context. The scourge of illegal narcotics is not unique to the Philippines. As we all know, it afflicts Latin America, where I can name 3 countries where the death rate at the hands of vigilantes and law enforcement agents per capita population is higher than it ever was under Duterte. And as you should know, and you will hear from the prosecution, at any rate, the Philippines as a country is uniquely positioned to act as a transit hub for the trafficking of narcotics emanating from the cartels in China. And with or without Duterte, so we argue, the death rate would have kept on rising. Indeed, as we will prove with statistics and reports, the death rate flowing from narcotics-related crime actually increased after Rodrigo Duterte left power. And where, I ask you, has the International Criminal Court been seen that Rodrigo did anything? The totally lawful Duterte campaign against illegal drugs and their suppliers took place when his administration was after the declaration of martial law. And it was on that significant day that Rodrigo Duterte was exposed to the tyranny of oppression and the abuse of power by the elite. And he took a decision. On that day, he chose to devote himself to a life of selfless public service. As a professor at the local police academy and as a public prosecutor in Davao, Rodrigo Duterte developed a lifelong passion, some would say an enduring obsession, for law and order, something for which he unapologetically enforced throughout his time as mayor of Davao City. Not, as the prosecution say, through sowing murder and mayhem, but through winning the love, respect and admiration of his fellow citizens. The very same citizens who continued to re-elect him time after time, term after term, on no less than 7 occasions over more than 2 decades. And throughout his 20 or so years tenure as the mayor of Davao, Rodrigo Duterte and his family transformed that city from an outpost of communist insurgency and criminal violence into what is now one of the safest cities, not just in the Philippines, but in the entire world. This was indeed the so-called Davao model, which the prosecution wants to persuade you was code for unbridled criminal violence. And this was the type of leader that the Filipino nation wanted in 2016. So, Rodrigo Duterte was elected into power, not in spite of, but specifically because of his firm and uncompromising commitment to upholding law and order. And after his election as president, Rodrigo Duterte remained a man of the people, without seeking to patronize the people. Gung-ho in his ways and with a belligerent tone, he spoke the tough tongue of the street, not the dissembling discourse of international diplomacy. He said what the people wanted to hear, but he said it in a way that offended sensibilities of world leaders unaccustomed to hearing it. One in particular, And that was what set him on the slippery slope to a prison cell in The Hague. And let me tell you how it works. It starts with the media, controlled by the powerful and the politically influential. With a sensational headline and a twisted editorial slant, the moguls sell their papers while promoting the partisan agenda of their backers in power. They highlight the salacious content while ignoring the true context, because that is what captivates the reader. And so it was with Rodrigo Duterte, whose speeches were fertile fodder for his enemies and detractors. A man whose hyperbole, bluster and rhetoric, once published, became a natural target for privately funded NGOs and human rights activists, a loose collective more commonly known as civil society. These people descended upon the Philippines to advance an agenda even more lacking in objectivity than that of the media, and heavily funded by tycoons with even grander designs, they print their glossy reports, replete with iconic photographic images of grieving families and dead bodies in rain-swept, nighttime crime scenes, all dramatically illuminated with the fluorescent glow of neon. Images carefully crafted to shock the conscience and to sway the emotions, and, I may say, to be used by the prosecutor when they don't even relate to the charges. And they gave their slick reports bold titles lifted straight out of a James Bond movie, such as License to Kill, One Shot to the Head, You Can Die Anytime, or simply, They Just Kill. The photographers are feted and their shots exhibited as art all over the world, and the brave journalists who act as their sources win awards and Nobel Prizes. And slowly but surely, their narrative becomes the sacred, unchallengeable and unshakable truth. And so the pressure builds up, and the academics who haunt the corridors of the progressive left law faculties far away in the United States tweet their research and publish their articles pontificating about crimes against humanity, systematic attacks against the civilian population, and they point their finger at one man alone, and bandy about slogans such as accountability and the prevention of impunity. They give their gratuitous advice on what should be done, sometimes academics who formerly worked alongside the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. Communications and complaints are filed, and the rest, as they say, is history. In any event, we're not gathered here today to judge a man on the basis of his coarse attitude or his vulgar language. This court has convened a confirmation hearing to verify whether substantial grounds exist to believe that Rodrigo Duterte, the people's president, together with various so-called co-perpetrators, over the years of his governance, devised a criminal policy of wholesale and wanton murder. And since we are in a court of law, it is worth stressing, although I should not have to, cases are decided on the basis of evidence, not supposition, not rumour, not spicy gossip, and certainly not on the basis of political rhetoric and bluster. Because at the end of the day, were it not for those belligerent and controversial speeches, there would have been no impetus to bring the people's president to The Hague. And when the prosecution's evidence is examined, I would ask you to keep an open mind and to question not just whether that evidence has been selectively presented, but whether there exists evidence which the prosecution has failed to produce. And I say this with justifiable cause, particularly with respect to the Duterte rhetoric. As we will prove during the substantive part of our submissions, the notorious speeches on which the prosecution relies have been cherry-picked to suit its narrative while ignoring the many other speeches